have two candidates who are running for the position of Whatcom County Sheriff, candidate Bill Elfo and Joy Gilfilen. The description of this office is as follows. As the only elected law enforcement officer, the sheriff is the chief executive officer and conservator of the peace in the county and accountable directly to the people. Some of the primary functions of the sheriff's office are to provide law enforcement services to all citizens of Whatcom County, to support and work cooperatively with municipal, state, tribal, and federal law enforcement agencies in protecting the public, to operate the Whatcom County correction system, and to advocate for improvements and efficiencies in the criminal justice, mental health, and public safety systems. The sheriff serves a 4-year term, and the office is nonpartisan. The annual salary is $160,806. Our format will be the same as we've followed before, and the candidates have been advised about the rules. They will have 2 minutes each for their opening statement. They will have 1 minute to respond to the questions, and they will make a 1-minute closing. Each candidate has a challenge card, and they will be able to use these cards just one time during the debate. The card gives them an opportunity to rebut something that their opponent has said or to add more information to the topic. Candidates, you each have your cards? Okay. You just need to hold them up and let me know when you want to use them. Timers are here. Carol Como on your right and Michelle Kopcha. I really appreciate your help today to make everything run smoothly. The timers will flash a yellow sign, which is your warning. 15 seconds remain. Don't worry about the bell right now. When time is up, they will show you the red stop sign, but if you continue to talk, Carol will ring the bell, and then I will have to cut you off. We ask that the candidates both be respectful of our time allotted so that we can ask as many questions and you can answer as many questions as possible. An important goal of the league is that we have a civil discussion here, and to that end, we ask that those in the audience refrain from clapping and be respectful of each candidate, and hold your applause until the end of the debate. Some questions have been prepared by the League Question Committee, and we encourage everybody in the audience to send your written questions up so that we can ask them. Remember that your question must be something that both candidates can respond to. Ushers are available to pick up your cards, to write your question that you have a question, or to provide another card. Just raise your hand when you want to get their attention. And your questions will be screened by our screening committee, Cindy Madigan and Julie Hubner, who are here. They will be making sure that the question is legible, and they will be trying to avoid duplication on the issues that are before us. For this debate, the candidates rolled a dice when they came in, and the person who got the high number got to choose their order of speaking. I understand candidate Elfo, you're going to go first.
Thank you.
So let's get started if our candidates are ready.
Thank you. I'm Bill Elfo, your current Whatcom County Sheriff, and I'd like to thank the League for sponsoring this forum on this very important issues relating to the office of Sheriff. I'm honored to have served as your sheriff for the past 15 years, and I think together we've accomplished a lot. Crime rates have dropped dramatically over that period. Violent crime is down 24%, property crime is down 44%, burglaries alone are down 63%. We've disrupted the leadership of organized gangs and drug trafficking organizations. We have a neighborhood policing or neighborhood deputy program that implements community policing. We have deputy sheriffs working on the school campuses with the kids. We've worked with the community to implement best practices for very serious crimes such as sexual assault, child abuse, crimes against the elderly, and animal abuse. While crime is down, we have an increasing problem with acute mental illness, so I started a mental health deputy program and just doubled it recently, where these deputies go out and try to get people into services before they get into the criminal justice system. And we have a social worker that's embedded and rides along with the deputy on these calls. We've received actually raving reviews, and I'm very appreciative of the County Council for supporting that program. I'm excited. For the last 2 decades nearly, I've been advocating for a crisis stabilization center, and groundbreaking is this on Monday. And that'll provide deputies with realistic options for diverting people from the criminal justice system to treatment for drug addiction and mental illness. And we have been involved in day one in the planning for the operation of that facility. We've worked with the courts and the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force to dramatically reduce reliance on the jail by offering jail alternative programs, electronic home monitoring for pretrial inmates. District court use of the jail is down 11%, Superior Court use of the jail is down 12%, and we're increasing treatment.
Thank you for stopping.
That was quick.
Candidate Gilfilen, your opening statement, please.
Thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this debate. I appreciate it deeply. I am Joy Gilfilen, candidate for Whatcom County Sheriff. I am a troubleshooter, a problem solver, and a community leader. I've been in the business world for 40 years, trailblazing in 5 entirely different fields from local to national interest. My biggest skill set is in business management. After 10 years of looking into the jail and justice system problems in Whatcom County, I have concluded that we cannot afford to pass any more taxes. We cannot afford to build another jail. And the only solution to the crisis problems that we are facing is prevention, early intervention, restorative justice, and other solutions. It doesn't matter how much we do post-arrest, we must stop the inflow of people into the jail system pre-arrest, and that would be my focus as a sheriff. It seems odd for people to think that a business person might be running for sheriff, but I've found that law enforcement is really great at stopping danger, but it doesn't necessarily solve the whole chief executive office problem that we have in Whatcom County. We consume way too much money, 60 to 70%, depending on how you measure it, in justice reform or in justice, jails, mental health, and all the things related. When looking into the problem, I realized that only 600,000 people nationwide go into prison. That's the criminal element. On a jail element, we are arresting 10.6 million people. Why is there such a disparity? It's because we've developed a churn rate of building people through jails that's feeding an entire privateering industry. We have an opportunity in Whatcom County to stop that churn rate, rebuild our community, and do something different.
Thank you. Okay, for the first question, and we have 1 minute in your response for the questions. First question, candidate Elfo will go first. What life experiences and qualifications do you have to be the top law enforcement official of Whatcom County?
I've been in law enforcement my whole adult life. I have a bachelor's and master's degree in criminal justice, a Juris Doctorate. I've been a prosecutor. I've been a city attorney. I've been president of the State Sheriff's Association. I've done a lot. I've built relationships to make sure we have good relationships with all the local police and tribal agencies here in our community. I've testified before the legislature many times on criminal justice issues, including those aimed at criminal justice reform. As the Director of Emergency Management, which is another responsibility of Sheriff, I've testified before the Congress of the United States. It's brought millions of dollars into our community for homeland protection. In fact, we're planning a major drill simulating an oil train derailment at the international border this month. I have executive and basic level law enforcement. Law enforcement is serious business. It's mission critical, and you need an experienced law enforcement officer at the helm.
Thank you. Candidate Gilfilen, your response, please.
I totally agree that law enforcement is mission critical, and we have almost 200 people who are employed by the Sheriff's Department. I have no problem at all with the law enforcement side of the Sheriff's Office. Where I have a problem has to do with corrections. By the way, we also have over 17 other agencies that I'm aware of in this county that work on law enforcement. The last thing that I think we need is another law enforcement officer. What we have is absolutely the most highly trained law enforcement official here. The problem is he was raised and groomed in the world of mass incarceration, where the job of law enforcement was to pass taxes, build jails, arrest more, and repeat. So 40 years of that is, let me go back. When you have a hammer, everything you see is a nail. Building jails and passing taxes is what mass incarceration does. I will change that goal.
Thank you. And candidate Elfo, you have a challenge.
The duties as chief law enforcement officer can't easily be snuffed off. When I get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning and we have somebody with a gun holding their family hostage, you need people that are able, willing, and ready to make the critical decisions that those situations involve and know how to prepare for the appropriate responses. And to say every problem's a hammer and a nail, that's not the fact. We have the most robust jail alternative programs here in Washington, and I'm working with people every day in the treatment and prevention purviews to improve it. I've got to say, I'm endorsed by both the current and former chair, Jill Bernstein, and Jack Hovenier of the Incarceration Prevention Reduction Task Force, and every single member of the county council. We're working together collaboratively to emphasize treatment and prevention over punishment.
Thank you. Do you want to respond to this?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mr. Elfo, you have an undersheriff who directs 3 different divisions. One is the law enforcement division, one is the crisis management division, and one is the corrections division. And those law enforcement officers are the ones in the field every day doing the business. From my understanding, and if this is different, I'd like to know how many people you have in fact arrested, incarcerated yourself, or investigated yourself. Most of that is done by the field. That is terrific. That needs to be done, and I have no problem with that. But chief executive officer managing the business affairs, managing budgets, determining how much money should go into which one of those fields, I think is a different question. And I do have challenges with the way it's being done.
The next question, and candidate Gilfilen, you will respond first. So this week is Climate Action Week. Do you think climate change will impact the emergency response duties of the Sheriff's Office? And if so, how and what action need to be taken to address these impacts?
I think there's 3 absolutely irrevocable impacts. One of them is migration of people and the need for food, water, and services, and that affects immigration. The second one is we absolutely have to have the most mobile, capable, and productive population possible. They cannot be held inside jails where we're going to have to deal with them, and we can't afford to be disempowering them and making them useless in the field. The third issue is that we need our crisis management team absolutely out of the basement of the jail. They need to be moved over to the Emergency Operations Center, and that center should be absolutely at top flight with all critical staff in one location. There's 24,000 square feet out there, and the Sheriff's Office only uses up about 20,000 square feet inside the county courthouse. It could be moved out and taken there, just like when Trump was brought here and there were 300 officers working out of that facility.
Candidate Elfo, your response?
Sure. We're preparing for climate change. I've obtained grants to put tsunami sirens and sirens that could be used warning in inland coastal areas. We're working with the Planning Commission. We're working also with the County Council's appointed Climate Change Advisory. We've taken them through the Emergency Management Center. Our emergency management personnel, all of them work out of the state-of-the-art emergency management center, which is a joint consortium. It's not just the Sheriff's Office, it's the City of Bellingham Fire Department, and it's the Port of Bellingham. And there were not 300 people in there on during President or candidate Trump's visit. We have essential people there. We work under the incident command system, and it's very important that a candidate for sheriff understand that and how it operates.
Okay, and I see we have a challenge from candidate Gilfilen. Your challenge?
My challenge is that when I was working and speaking with the people who are in charge of the emergency management facility, I've checked with port commissioners to understand how important it is that we have an emergency management facility. It was the emergency management head who told me that there were 300 officers working out of that facility being used for different purposes. The port and the county and the city are all partners in that facility. There is no reason in my conversation with the different people that we shouldn't be able to work out a different way of using that high-impact, high-quality facility for emergency services, including managing the sheriff's office.
Candidate Elfo?
And I've got to say, coming back to that center, I was able to acquire over $5 billion worth of donations to equip that from getting used equipment from the East Coast that was used. That's where everything that's involved there works. Ms. Gilfilen is mistaken. That is where the emergency management office is and our trained emergency personnel work. It's the idea is you don't bring all the officers in there. You put the officers out of the field where they're needed, and the command staff directs them, and I, as sheriff, as the director of emergency management, are right there at the helm in the joint command of the center.
Hey, thank you. You've both used your challenge cards now, so I just get to ask the questions going forward. Does the sheriff's office work with ICE or INS, and if so, how? As sheriff, would you continue that practice? And if so, what would it look like? And candidate Elfo, you are first.
ICE has two components. One is the group that protects human trafficking, drug trafficking. That's called Homeland Security Investigations, and we do work with them. And we try to disrupt drug trafficking organizations, try to rescue victims of trafficking and stem the flow of narcotics and illegal weapons. That component we work closely with. The other is called ER&R, removal and deportation. We do not have a relationship with them. Our job is to enforce the criminal law. We don't enforce civil aspects of immigration law. We need to have the respect and the confidence and the trust of all members of the community to come forward and report crime and victimization to law enforcement. We have enough federal agents in our county to deal with whatever the federal mandate is, and we don't get involved in doing that.
Thank you. Candidate Gilfilen?
I would have to say ditto, since I am not an immigration officially trained person. It makes sense to me from a national level that we as a border community must work directly hand in hand with all of these people. Does it mean that we need to be assisting them in doing mass deportations and all those things? I would not agree with that. I did notice that during the Dakota Access Pipeline protests, during multiple other protests in Whatcom County, the sheriff has an enormous role in dealing with police control. So I think there is a lot more that can be done with sheriffs as far as peacekeeping, as opposed to just always defaulting to criminal justice. I think we have a lot of peacemaking that we need to be doing, and I think that your ability to work with the state, the governor, the feds is critical, and diplomacy is necessary, and not defaulting to law enforcement only, and instead looking at peacemaking and peacekeeping is critical.
Thank you. Next question. What actions could you take to recruit officers that reflect more diversity? Candidate Gilfilen.
I think being able to recruit more officers, we're pretty full of officers at the moment, but if you want to recruit more officers that are dealing with diversity, I think it's critical that we actually have good, high-quality hiring practices that allow us to look for people who have had training, not just cultural diversity, but de-escalation training, restorative justice training, health and recovery training, people who are able to walk into situations, who have humor skills and the ability to actually downsize violence as opposed to increase it. So I would be looking at all cultures, all sexual orientations, whatever works.
Thank you. Candidate Elfo?
I believe the law enforcement agency should be reflective of the community it serves. And we are actually overrepresented. We have a higher ratio of African-American, Hispanic deputies than we do to the general population here in Whatcom County, and I'm very proud of that. We make it known that this is a welcoming place to work, and we treat all people with civility and respect. We've just hired another Sikh deputy who's currently in the academy, and we have one working in the Corrections Bureau and one in the pipeline to hire. I go out and try to build trust in the community. I go to the Sikh community, I go to the Russian community, I go to the Hispanic community, and try to speak in my broken Spanish, bringing my wife along who is Hispanic to translate. And we're very committed to diversity, and we'll continue to do that. That's how we build community trust here in Whatcom County. And we have a coordinator that goes out in the community and helps us get those appointments, those opportunities, and helps build the trust.
Thank you. Candidate Elfo, given what you've said, do you still think there's implicit bias that affects the operations of the sheriff's office? And if so, what role does the sheriff have in influencing those effects? How would you approach it?
I believe there's implicit bias in all segments of society. And the important thing is that we train our people to be fully aware of that and make sure it doesn't influence their decisions. So we have a very strong training component. We have a train the trainer we actually do, and all our people are trained in that, and it's part of our every other year training program. We also track any complaints of discrimination or bias or profiling, and we thoroughly investigate those, and then we make our findings public, and we invite, I have a board that's very diverse, people from all segments, all races are on that board, and they have the ability to review what we do, and I open it up to any member of the public that would like to know about it. So,
Candidate Gilfilen.
It's an interesting question because when you do the research, USA Today published a report after the problems back east, and we have a higher rate of Native American, Black, and Mexican arrests in Whatcom County than is normal. Ferguson, Missouri was the place I was thinking of. After that problem that we had there, USA Today reported that Whatcom County was really high in over-incarceration, those particular races. The problem that I have is in Whatcom County, I think we have actually a class bias and a bias against all poor people. And it comes really, really deeply. The Vera Institute of Justice reported that between 1970 and 2014, the number of people in jail in Whatcom County grew 9-fold, while overall the county population only grew by 2.5 times. The arrest rate tripled, and our average length of stay in the jail went from 8.5 to 22 days. That's unacceptable to me.
Thank you. Next question. Do you agree with the current federal government's interpretation of the Second Amendment? If not, or if so, how would you work for greater gun safety within Whatcom County? Candidate Gilfilen.
First things first, anybody who owns a gun ought to be trained to have it. And I would promote and encourage gun safety training and marksmanship and public safety training. I grew up on a farm in eastern Washington, and no one ever got a gun who was not fully trained to use it. I think that's absolutely critical. I also do believe that we have the right to keep and bear arms. That's important. And that we need to be able to hunt. We need to be able to do things. I do have a problem with carrying weapons in large commercial places and cities, so I'm not really a person who would favor the open carry, come into the city in large places and walk around packing your gun. I think that's a little too much.
Thank you. Candidate Elfo?
Well, it's up to the Supreme Court to interpret the Constitution and our legislature to enact the laws. The job of the sheriff is to enforce the laws and do so wisely. Possession of a firearm, though, is more than marksmanship, as Joy alluded to. It also involves avoiding and de-escalating the use of force is something that we try to emphasize in our training we do both for our officers but for citizens groups that we speak to. It's an awesome responsibility to own a firearm, and we want to make sure they're not carried irresponsibly.
The next question, Candidate Elfo, would you please respond first? Do you think that Whatcom County constituents want incarceration reduction? And if so, what's the next step that you will take to advance that?
I believe the citizens of Whatcom County want to emphasize treatment and prevention over incarceration. I went to every single listening session that the county council had, and that's the direction this county is going. And at the sheriff's office, I'm proud of all we're doing to reduce it. As I said, Superior Court use of jail time is down 12%, District Court down by almost 10.99% because of the work we're doing in electronic home monitoring for pretrial people, sentenced people, removing financial barriers to day reporting programs. People used to have to pay the cost of that, providing that service. I now ask the council to waive that or allow me to waive it, and they do. So, and I think anything we do, if the council is, candidates have said we need to replace a jail, well, it needs to be done so with adequate space for evaluation, for treatment, and for housing of people with special severe mental health community the judges determine can't be released into the community.
Thank you. Candidate Gilfilen.
I've been attending jail task force meetings, incarceration prevention meetings, public hearings hearings that were held, the listening tour hearings, the hearings that were held on the environmental impact statement. I've been doing research for 10 years on how we are over-incarcerating people and over-criminalizing people in Whatcom County. I have filed reports to stop the escalation of violence. I've published reports that preceded the Vera report, that preceded the development of the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force, and I have been standing up for voters in Whatcom County since 2010. I started it because we do not deserve to be using freedom and the taking away of freedom as our bartering chip for how we run our law and justice system. People are incarcerated in Whatcom County just like the rest of the nation. We're not any worse, but you are not innocent until proven guilty. It will cost you between $3,000 and $30,000 to get out of the system once arrested. That's this research.
Thank you. The Sheriff's Department employees typically face high level of stress, conflict, and danger. How might you support these employees to manage their pressures so that they continue to perform their work in a sustainable, effective way if you are a successful candidate?
Repeat that
Sure.
question.
The Sheriff's Department employees face typically high levels of stress, conflict, and danger. Would you support these employees to manage their pressures so that they can continue to perform their work in a sustainable and effective way?
I just completed 79 interviews of people who go into the jail system. And I did the research to talk to not only people who were inside the system, but people who were corrections officers, emergency services providers. And the biggest problem we have, in my opinion, is that we absolutely create complex post-traumatic stress disorder in the law enforcement, emergency management, and crisis management field. It is incumbent upon us as a sheriff's department to go in and start with de-escalation training, trauma intervention, healing programs, and this is for officers. One of the most important things we could do immediately is take the sheriff's office out of the basement and put them in a better quality location, open up space at the jail, remove 50% of the people out of the maximum security place and put them in the minimum security location so that we can actually fix the problem without having to pass more taxes. We can fix the problem now. We don't need another 10 years.
Candidate Elfo.
I believe our deputies do a very incredible job under very difficult and dangerous circumstances. They see things that no human being should have to see in their life, and sometimes they see them on a daily basis, and this does take its toll. So that's why I've arranged for a crisis debrief program whenever we have a critical incident, a death of a child where you witness the horrific, where we have folks available to talk to those deputies and help them diffuse and help them survive that incident. And we also, in our selection process for deputies, we're very, very cognizant of people having the right psychological makeup. We have a very extensive background investigation, but we also have a very, very lengthy process where there's psychological testing to make sure that they're the best candidates to be able to deal with those types of situations and don't melt down.
Thank you. Candidate Elfo, you'll answer first, please. Can you explain how deputies make decisions about who to arrest? Are there other ways to make those decisions?
The deputies are guided by the law. We're a nation of laws, but we want to give them every tool that's available to have in the toolbox. So for an example, with the when to make an arrest was the question. You know, some laws we have no discretion. Domestic violence, they're mandated. We have to make an arrest. But in other crimes, we have discretion. We're able to, particularly now, divert them to available services. I see this Crisis Stabilization Center coming online. I'm working with our prosecuting attorney, Eric Ritchie, to develop a law enforcement assisted diversion program for those that are in possession of small quantities of narcotics. Right there and then, they're offered a chance to go to treatment or go to jail. And we're working on a grant that'll make that a 24/7 reality. So the deputies follow the law, but we want to ensure that we look at all aspects of the law. And we are a peacekeeping organization, and we want to avoid jail except when it's necessary and required by the law.
Thank you. Candidate Gilfilen?
Yeah, I cannot disagree with anything that Elfo said. Mr. Elfo, sorry. I agree that many of the things that we're doing from the Incarceration Prevention Reduction Task Force is good. I agree that the criminal arrest patterns of the police officers is fine in Whatcom County. The one thing I have heard from deputies and other police officers is that the biggest problem we have is they have nowhere else to take people, so sometimes they must arrest because there's no social services and safety nets to actually help them other than taking them to the hospital or to the jail. I think that's a biggest failure that we have, and we need to actually fix that problem, which is why I have been fighting against the jail tax since 2010. And many of the changes that are happening right now have happened because I stepped in and have encouraged people not to pass that jail tax from the beginning. I think we must do, there is a problem with prosecutorial discretion, and I think a lot of those issues have been handled in the IPRTF.
Okay, thank you. Next question, can you explain, you already answered that. Please explain what restorative justice means to you, and do you think there is a practical role in our local criminal justice system for restorative justice? Candidate Gilfilen.
I think it is the biggest untapped option that we can use everywhere, universally. Restorative justice is, simply put, depending on how you use it. Some people say you can't use it except after you've had an arrest. That's simply not true. We've used restorative justice principles in escalating a situation in Whatcom County where we had a young man on the street who was protesting his father, and it was a really serious situation. It was freezing out. A police officer was trying to get the guy to argue with him so that he could arrest him because he didn't want the guy to die on the street. I understand it. You know what we did? We walked in and we simply talked to him about what is the real problem here? How can we help? What's happened? Who's transgressed? How do we fix it? You can do restorative circles. You can do restorative justice. You can do these things a lot better pre-arrest or pre-conviction than post-conviction, but you can do it then. The whole point is, what's the problem really and how can we help you fix it? And how can we repair problems and be better in the end?
Thank you. Candidate Elfo.
Oh, just to agree with Joy, the example she gave about the young man, that's where we would send our mental health deputies to intervene before they came to attention of the criminal justice system. But I've read the treatise, the leading treatise on restorative justice, and we're trying to replicate in my role as sheriff as much as I can. You know, in the jail, we want people to be prepared when they leave jail, if they're in jail at all, to be prepared to go back into the community. So I've worked with Goodwill. We have folks that come in there that train them how to do before they're released, a job interview, help them fill out a resume. give them gift certificates to buy clothes, to dress appropriately. We have literacy counselors come in, and more importantly, the Goodwill has a list of employers that are willing to give folks a chance once they're released from the jail. We're also offering medically assisted treatment, the withdrawal from opioids, and gives them a chance to get off drugs, an opportunity. We try to induce them into treatment and then make arrangements to continue it when they're released.
Thank you. This is the last question before your closing statements. What is the sheriff's role in working with other local governments, including the tribes?
Well, law enforcement, emergency management, and jail issues overlap throughout the entire community. So we support the small city police departments, we support the Bellingham Police, we support the tribal law enforcement agencies in resource sharing with investigative skills. Sometimes we have more trained people, but they reciprocate and we get help and assistance from them. We cover each other in the county to back each other up. And emergency management, the sheriff is responsible not just for the unincorporated areas, but all the small cities in developing a comprehensive emergency management plan. I'm glad to say I'm working well with all those folks that are involved in that process, and I actually have the support of all the mayors for endorsement for re-election that we serve in that role.
Thank you. Candidate Gilliland.
The Law and Justice Council was created way back when. It was a legally mandated council that was actually non-functional for the last 10 years or so. And just recently, it got reactivated with the Incarceration Prevention Reduction Task Force. I can't disagree with anything that the sheriff has said. I would say that we have a lot more work to be done in helping all of the different law enforcement agencies in the area, and I think the sheriff has a primary job to do that, to de-escalate and to help these law enforcement agencies work better with organizations in the community, like the Restorative Community Coalition. I've been president of that coalition for 9 years, trying to work with Law and Justice, trying to work with the Lummi Nation and others to bring more community-centered solutions to the market. And I think we have a bridge that can be built there, and I'm really excited at the opportunity to do that.
Thank you. And it's now time for your 1-minute closing statement. Candidate Elfo, you're first.
Well, thank you. I believe public safety is mission critical. To lead these law enforcement officers to put their lives on the line every day and the citizens that depend on them, you need an experienced law enforcement officer. Whether I make arrests or not, and I have made a few, you need that leadership and that experience. I think that just manifested itself in the solving of the Mandy Stavik case, which I personally was involved in since I've been sheriff. So that's important, and I think my credentials speak for themselves, and my ability to work with other people through the endorsements I have, I think it reflects the community is behind me. But I'm also involved in a lot of other things. I've been 10 years on the board of directors of the Boys and Girls Club. I've served about 10 years on the Bridget Collins Family Service Center Advisory Committee, and as a board member as well. I'm involved in all types of community events so I can develop relationships with everybody we need to serve, and they trust me as a law enforcement officer.
Thank you, sir. Candidate Gilliland.
It's my experience after working for 40, 50 years in business and community development that community needs to come first. I have spent 40 years doing things like coaching basketball and working in community development. I helped lead the Fairhaven Task Force report, the Fairhaven Task Force to community change down there. I've worked on various research projects. I'm endorsed by the 42nd Legislative Democrats. I'm endorsed by the Whatcom Democratic Women's Club. I am a certified Democrat, and I was a Bernie delegate to the state. So I got involved in politics, but only because I was having a problem with the law enforcement and the justice system, and with the fact that we were escalating so many jail issues that we were bankrupting our children and we're bankrupting our business people. Law enforcement cannot solve the social crises that we have. We need a different kind of sheriff for the 21st century.
Thank you both for being here with us today and letting the voters hear from you. It's very important. And thank you, members of the audience.